Carole Walker on Times Radio.
Welcome back to the programme. Now, should you be allowed to vote at the age of 16? Sir Keir Starmer has said that the idea of giving the vote to 16-year-olds is not such an outlandish idea, and his party is considering extending the franchise to EU citizens in this country as well. Tory MPs have accused Labour of trying to rig elections in the party's favour. Earlier, I spoke to Richard Murphy, political economist and founder of Tax Research UK, and Noah Khogali, Conservative councillor and political commentator with Young Voices UK. And I started by asking Richard whether he thought he should be allowed to vote from the age of 16.
I'm in favour of it because I, broadly speaking, think that 16-year-olds are as competent to vote as anybody else I know in society, pretty much. And I think that, frankly, young people have been sold incredibly short within our political environment, by our economy, by the choices made by, let's be honest, old people, which haven't necessarily been very beneficial to them. And so I think that rebalancing is appropriate. But I do have a big problem. And my big problem is that of all the issues that could be picked up with our electoral system, this one is actually really not the most important. If Keir Starmer was to listen to his own party, if he was to listen to the world beyond his party, he'd know that proportional representation is the thing that his party really, really want him to address.
Well,
so
in
do
his
others.
party.
No. Let's be clear. It is party policy by a vote of 80%. So it's not some in his party. It is official Labour Party policy.
Well, let's just speak first of all about the issue of whether the vote should be extended to younger people. Noah, you speak for Young Voices UK. Do you think we should give the vote to people from the age of 16?
I think, quite frankly, this is a bit of a sticking plaster on a problem of youth engagement in politics. It doesn't really solve the issue of young people kind of getting sidelined by policy just by giving more people the right to vote, who probably won't turn out in any great number compared to what they do now. I do fully sympathise with that. I was 16 6 years ago. I do know the frustration of looking around and being like, "Ooh, I know what's best. I want to exert my voice onto the world." But my views have changed and I hope matured a lot since then. And quite honestly, I wouldn't give my own 16-year-old self the right to vote. I would give myself time to mature and embed into the political world and go on my own political journey. The moment you start voting and you enter into this world where we pick political teams, it's very, very hard to change and grow and mature.
Oh, absolute nonsense, Noah. Sorry, come on. I'm sorry to say that, but I really, really think you're undermining your own credibility. I really hope you do think so more of yourself than you're selling. But also, you're being really demeaning to young people. I mean, I was 49 years ago, and I well remember that I had well-formed political opinions, which were soundly based upon clear judgment. In fact, the first general election in which I was involved was in 1970, and I was 12. And I was absolutely certain of my opinion that we needed a Labour government, and it was based upon the fact that I had just been sent to a grammar school and my twin had just been sent to a secondary modern, and I saw all the devastation that gave rise to. And I knew that governments committed to equality in education were the basis for the future. I formed a totally informed opinion as to why I would choose a party. I've changed my party opinions more than once ever since, and I'm certainly not a party politician now, unlike you, because I know you are a party politician. I'm not. I can form my opinion, change it, and reform it. And I believe in democracy, and to undermine young people because they might change their mind is absolutely ridiculous. That's the whole basis on which democracy works, for a start.
No, I think what I'm really doing here is trying to give young people the opportunity to explore their own political opinions. What
Through the
we've seen
vote.
over recent times, when you've had these large-scale youth movements in politics. So on the left, you had the Corbyn era and massive youth movement. That was good to see young people engaged in politics, but it was also a time when on the right you had a lot of young people who had kind of come of age around the time of Brexit and had just become very right-wing for no particular reason other than they'd picked a team. And it wasn't a very nice type of politics at all. That's not the young people's fault. It was the party politicians' fault that realised that was the easiest way to motivate people to get to the ballot box. And I think it would be unsurprising that if this kind of thing came in, you'd see a real solidifying of populist politics, because it would become
nonsense.
Absolutely.
So Noah, I'm sure a lot of people change their views and their support for different parties, but surely that doesn't matter. And if you're 16 and vote for one party and then a few years later vote for another one, surely that's not a reason to not allow people at the age of 16 to vote.
No, but it's not a solution. So the reality here is that I think Labour are trying to use this as a solution to lack of political education and lack of political engagement in young people, when the reality is we need to be pouring more resources and more money into something like civic education.
I entirely agree with that. I think that's a perfectly fair point.
That needs to be the focus, not the sticking plaster that it's just give 16-year-olds the right to vote.
But hang on. All education should be solution focused. And the solution here is to actually educate people so that they are informed as to how to make a proper decision. So they wouldn't have voted for Brexit because they would have been led astray by the elderly part of the population who sold them a pup. And no, they wouldn't have been led astray by Corbyn either. They weren't led astray by Corbyn because he was never elected. So let's not go there. What you're being is deeply patronising and saying only until they can prove their maturity and follow your wisdom may they vote. I don't buy it. Young people at 16 are perfectly capable of forming an opinion. I have taught people who are a little older than that. I met a lot who are younger than that, and they come with very, very firmly formed opinions, but also, and I'll be honest about this, open minds which ask relevant questions. I have taught political economy to 18-year-olds. I know that. So I don't think there's much difference between that and a 16-year-old who's forming their opinion to make that decision to study that subject.
OK, well, let's let Noah just respond to that, because I think you were also making the point that perhaps young people do need more education, but clearly that would have to be something that would be fairly carefully regulated, wouldn't it? Because you can imagine how much trouble there would be if people felt that what they were being taught was slanted in one political direction or another.
Absolutely. If you had a world where all 16-year-olds could vote, the amount of scrutiny that would rightly come upon those teaching civic education or teaching politics A-level would be absolutely incredible and pose huge, huge questions. The whole thing would also open a massive can of worms where, you don't only just start political education where you turn 16. If you've got a 14-year-old that thinks they know about politics, why shouldn't they have the right to vote too? Why shouldn't a 10-year-old? The argument that more people just equals better democracy doesn't make a huge amount of sense. In that world, literally everybody of whatever age should be allowed to vote. The reality is that we have essentially, as a Western world, decided that at 18, you're an adult, you are responsible enough to do most things. If we keep that consistent, it just makes it easier for everything, rather than arbitrarily choosing random ages to allow you to do things in civic society. Stick with 18 as what we've all agreed essentially as they are an adult, they are competent to make decisions within their own right, and to express themselves in the world. That should be consistent for everything. It's odd when we start trying to arbitrarily decide when people are competent enough to do things. It needs to be universal.
Richard, let me ask you, though, about the suggestion that this is just gerrymandering, that Keir Starmer wants to extend voting to people from the age of 16 and indeed to some EU nationals who are resident in the UK. The suggestion is obviously that he wants to extend the right to vote to these people because they'd be more likely to vote Labour.
I don't think that's the case at all. We don't know that. In fact, Noah just said that young people used to vote right-wing. And why wouldn't they if they were informed in that way? After all, the whole of the economic syllabus in sixth forms across the whole of the UK is utterly biased in favour of the Conservative Party. So when we were talking about regulation, that's one thing that would need to change completely.
Well, a lot more young people vote Labour, don't they, Richard?
Let's come back to the point, though. If a young person is capable of forming an opinion, if decisions are going to be made which fundamentally affect their future, and we have seen those things happen, and we're going to see them happen again, then why shouldn't they have the right to participate? I still think, however, and this is where I do think that Labour is wrong, and I'll go back right to my first point, letting young people vote when their vote won't count simply because the first past the post electoral system guarantees that the vast majority in this country don't count is where they are selling us short. Proportional representation so that young people could get the parties and the choices that they need, so that we did, for instance, have decent parties who are committed to tackling climate change, would then make their votes count. But at the moment, we have a party system that is rigged in favour of the Tories and rigged in favour of Labour, and which never allows anyone else in. And that's where the problem is. And young people could actually raise their voices to say, no, we want to be heard. And I find it really weird. I'm on here as the older person. I'm 65. Noah is a lot younger than me. I've worked out it's 43 years, and I appear to be the youth voice, and he's the geriatric voice. And it's very weird.
Well, Noah, just respond to that. I mean, you pointed out the fact that many young people don't vote, but if perhaps at a younger age they were encouraged to think about who they wanted in power, they were encouraged to think about who they wanted to represent them and make the decisions that affect their lives, couldn't that encourage more young people to get politically engaged, to understand the political system, and to actually go out and vote? Because that is vital for our democracy, isn't it?
The evidence does suggest that happens at the very beginning when it's a new thing and it's something exciting and new you can do, but that it tails off after a while. So I can see somewhat of a merit in that argument, but it's not really one. Internationally, it's something that happened in Scotland as well. This is the reality of the situation. It's something nice, something new, something exciting, and that's great. We need to make politics engaging. But if that doesn't last in the long term, then it is just a sticking plaster. Come on to the PR point really quickly. I don't think that does all the things that Richard's suggesting it does. The reality is, you see it especially in councils, that it results in weird backroom deals when nobody really gets what they voted for in the first place. Because even in Westminster, if you're forced into a coalition, even now, you, like the Lib Dems, would have to drop some of your headline policies. If that's happening all the time, nobody's getting what they voted for because everyone's just making weird deals in the dark, damp corridors of Westminster.
I will come back to Richard on that point. But Noah, I just wanted to ask you about this charge, this claim that Keir Starmer only wants this change to the voting franchise because he thinks it'll help Labour.
I think that's probably true. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the entire argument just needs to be dismissed. That more so is an issue that I think the Tories have to grapple with. And there's a reason that the Tories have struggled to win the youth vote, and it's because they've not made it very exciting. I know Keir Starmer's not the most exciting individual, but it's easier for young people to get on board with something that has something emotional attached to it. That's what I'm hearing from peers. And that's what I've experienced myself as I've grown up. The Tories have an issue with that and really do need to work on that. So just because it's something that benefits Labour right now, if it happened, isn't necessarily an argument against it. That just means that if it did happen, the Tories would need to step up their game.
OK, Richard, just finally then, that point of Noah's that the problem with a PR voting system is that you are much more likely to get coalitions, and that means that people don't necessarily get what they voted for.
No, fantastic. We'll get coalitions. We will actually get parties in power who represent what people want. Do you know what? We are the only country in Europe, apart from Belarus, who do first past the post. That's not a good recommendation, is it? And do you know, do the rest all have failed governments? No, I watched, for example, the government in Denmark, a country I know well. Is it failed because there's always and will always be forevermore coalition governments? No, it creates mature politicians who know how to compromise, who know how to do a deal, who know how to work out what their priorities are, and who know how to explain them. If only we could have that here.
Well, that was Richard Murphy, political economist and founder of Tax Research UK, and Noah Khogali, Conservative councillor and political commentator with Young Voices UK, speaking to me just a little earlier about whether or not you should get the vote at the age of 16.